Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Christianity Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the four eternal destinies of humankind. It just so happens that it's podcast 44. Coincidence? I don't think so. This doctrine, many people, in fact, I think no people watching this podcast will be familiar with this doctrine. And they'll ask, well, where did you get it from? Well, it's been a long time coming. I received this doctrine many years ago from the Lord, from reading the Bible, but also from me questioning this doctrine before the Lord and Him giving me visions about it and me challenging it. And if anything, over the last 20 years, I have become, become solid in this doctrine. And it's time to actually speak it out in public. And besides just our fellowship, I would say it's time to preach this as I believe it's something that's very, very important in the body of Christ at this time. I think it's timely, and I think it might not be such an obscure doctrine for long. The Lord did say, what you have received in private or in secret, share on the rooftops or shout on the rooftops. And what you'll find is this doctrine changes the way you see the Bible and the way you see other people. The way you read the Bible will change. It'll change your view forever. And you'll see then, you'll be questioning, why is it that we don't know this doctrine that is all over the Bible from Genesis to Revelation? And this is a question that I've been asking the Lord for a long time. And there's no answer. Really, the idea is this is something that seems to have been held back until this present time, or it seems to be so. But I leave it for you to judge. I leave it for you to comment and to study it for yourself. I'm going to be laying out at least 10, maybe 12 or 13 examples of this throughout the Bible, and we'll take it from there. So stay tuned.
Going where I am from here, from where I am to where I'm going. Going where I am from here to who I am, from where I've been.
Now, I want to start this study. Obviously, I said it's from Genesis to Revelation, this four destinies. But I want to start with the words of Jesus at the end. Like sometimes when you read a book, you want to go to the very end and see what the conclusion is or how it ends up. And this is what we're going to do right now. We're going to go to Revelation 22:11, and we're going to read what Jesus says concerning everything that's taken place in his history of mankind or humankind up to the end. And we read as follows. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according to his work shall be. So here we see that there are four. Now, how many times have I tried showing this to a person, and they'll say, I only see two. We have a bent, a doctrinal bent that's learned from when we're very young. But let's instead keep an open mind and not put a final point on what we think the doctrines of Christ are, what the doctrines of the Bible are. And let's keep an open mind as we go through the Bible and we look at all the examples and all the evidence that shows us that it's not just about heaven and hell. Heaven and hell comes from Islam. No, there's something a lot more subtle that gives us the tools, once we understand this, to understand the Bible much, much better, and gives us a much bigger appreciation for what the gospel is, and also how God's mercy works, and also how God's judgment works. As you would expect of a doctrine that is so crucial, so foundational to the understanding of the Bible and understanding the ways of God, it would be found right off the bat in Genesis. And it just so happens that the four destinies are spoken of the first time in Genesis 2. At verse 10 we read, And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is which compasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that which goes forth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. So we see that the out of the garden, out of the garden, out of the beginning of man, out of the beginning of our journey as an Adamic creature, as the beginning of our earthly endeavors as human beings, there are four streams going out. There are four river systems. And we know that the first one, now, we don't know, and I don't know personally. I mean, these are things that need to be studied over decades and to discover what each one represents. But I will get to what they represent. Obviously, I read Revelation 22:11, which shows ultimately what they are. But we can surmise and we can probably say that the first one, Pison, it says it's gold, and that would probably be the saints. The rest, I have done studies on this, and I have my theories, but I'm not going to be sharing them because I would rather go and see the breadth of the doctrine as opposed to the individual, I would say, details of every single doctrine. That can be for another time. The second time that we come across this doctrine, or at least that I notice this doctrine, is with the sons of Noah, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And why? Why is there three when I'm saying that there's four destinies? Well, the fourth destiny in this case, which are the wicked ones, have drowned. God has eliminated them. So in other words, the Bible is showing us that there are three kinds of saved people, three survivors, which are the saints, which are the righteous and the filthy. These three, not the wicked. The wicked are destroyed in the second death, and in this case, it's by a flood, okay, by the great flood, that the wicked are destroyed. But we see that there's something very hidden in here, but it's not as hidden as we might think. Even the names of the sons of Noah, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, mean something. Shem means the name, like the name of God. Those who have the name of God. Those are the saints. Japheth means spread out, and that's the nations. That's the righteous that populate, the saved, that populate the nations. That Shem rules over. The saints rule over the righteous in the next age, forever. And then finally we have Ham. Ham means hot. Hot, those are the people that are sent out into the wilderness and are parched. They don't have water. Remember on the parable of the rich man that was stuck somewhere and he wanted Abraham to bring him a cup of water because he was parched. And that's not because he's in flames. It's not because he's in hellfire. It's because he's in a desert. In Israel, when you're cast into the desert, you get parched because there's no water and because it's hot. In Canada, where I'm speaking from, it's the other way around, where there's a lot of snow, but it's cold. So you'll more likely die of cold than you will of before you die of thirst. You'll be dying of the cold. But in Israel and the place where the Bible comes to us from, it's the opposite. But also it's more in line with the eternal destiny of one who is filthy and cast into outer darkness, into the wilderness. So as we read in Genesis 9, verse 18, and the sons of Noah that went forth out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. Do you see how prophetic that is? So yes, in the past, those were the three sons that overspread the earth, but it's also the new heavens and new earth, the new earth. This is a prophetic statement. The whole earth is overspread with three of those eternal destinies. The ones that survived the second death now overspread the new earth, and so this is a prophetic statement. Now, as to the nature of the three sons, we read in verse 25 of the same chapter, Genesis 9, and he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." Now remember Canaan is Ham. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." So here we see that Japheth lives in the tents of Shem. In other words, Shem rules over Japhet. The holy ones, the saints, rule over the righteous, and the filthy or Ham are a servant of servants, and they are like on the lower rung of the hierarchy in eternity. Now, some people think that Ham is a certain racial group in this time, and that's false. That's not what this is about. This is about something future, and this is something about our how we live, what we are, what we do. It's what river we take. Now, obviously, if you're in a certain river system, there is a way to jump river systems. In other words, we can repent, we can turn to God, and God can place us in a different river system. But more on that later. For a further proof or a further example of the four eternal destinies, we turn to Deuteronomy 30. We start at verse 15. See, I have set before you this day life and good and death and evil. Now, in Hebrew, each one of those is a separate subject, the same way as at the beginning of the Bible when it says God created the heavens and the earth. It's et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In other words, et and et denote a particular thing that means that those two are subjects, are separate subjects. It's not one and the other so much as each one specifically. So the Hebrew here uses definite articles, which means each one is separate. There are four. It's not two. People will read this as, see, I have set before you this day life and good and death and evil. But that's not how it's written in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it's, see, I have set before you today life and good and death and evil. So we see the four destinies here. This repeats in a certain way in verse 19, which says, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your seed may live. But the way it's written, it's more like choose life and death, and I will set before you blessing and cursing. In other words, where it says I will set before you, or I will talk to you, it's actually in your face to face. What it represents is life and death is on the outside in the world, and then I will set before your face blessing and cursing. In other words, the Bema Seat judgment. There's two judgments. There's the great white throne judgment, which is life and death. Whoever wasn't written in in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So it's life and death. But blessing and cursing are before the Lord at the Bema Seat, and that's for the people of God. So we see that the way it's structured in Hebrew is that it says, I will present before your face blessing and cursing. So we see again the four destinies. Now, I skipped over Leviticus 16. Leviticus 16 is about Yom Kippur, about the two goats, one for the Lord and one for Azazel, or for the wilderness. Now, that doesn't talk about four destinies, but it talks about the first resurrection, where the saints are judged. And if a person isn't in the Lamb's book of life, well, he's not cast into the lake of fire. He's rejected. So in other words, we see that there's those that are sacrificed to God or to the Lord, and those that are cast away into the wilderness. And that represents the saints and the filthy, or the unclean, basically. We see the same thing in parallel with the New Covenant, or with the New Testament, with Barabbas and Jesus being presented on the pavement before Pilate and before the people. And the people have to choose between Barabbas, who is set free, and Jesus, who is sacrificed. It's the same. The Yom Kippur represents our choice of whether or not we want to go free and be just forgiven and go free, or we want to sacrifice ourselves with the Lord. That's up to us. It's the choice that we make. And most people, by far, because they don't understand, they will choose the easy path. They will choose Barabbas. Now, it just so happens that Barabbas in the Bible, in early Greek text, is called Jesus Barabbas. And his name is so close to Jesus Bar Abba, basically Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of the Father. Barabbas means son of the Father. they're so close that people were getting confused. And so in all the translations that we have now, and in later Greek texts, even Greek texts a couple of hundred years down the road, they omitted the word Jesus from Barabbas. Now, that was done because it was confusing people. But I want to bring that back to show that there is a perfect parallel between our choice, whether or not we want to escape into the wilderness or not be sacrificial and not just allow Jesus to be sacrificed for us, but ignore and completely ignore the call of the disciple to give his life. Remember, it says, he who seeks to save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for me, for his sake, will gain it. So we see that Yom Kippur is about the goat sacrifice for the Lord, which is the sacrificial goat, and the one that goes into the wilderness where the sins are laid back on its head. So much for forgiveness, because the forgiveness was not used properly, because actually the cross is not about forgiveness, as we know. The cross is about sanctification. So these are people that are unclean, never sanctified, always learning, never coming to the knowledge of the truth, having a form of godliness but denying the power. They wanted forgiveness. They didn't want holiness. Therefore, they are rejected because they are claiming to be the Lord's, and the Lord will judge his house. And if you show up at the Lord's house unclean, then you are sent away. You are sent away into the wilderness walk. And here we're going to see how the four destinies, the four eternal destinies, are not just from one author, but they're right through the Bible. And now we're going to look at a Psalm of David. So here's something that David spoke of. And did he know about the four eternal destinies? Well, I think he did. I think this is much more common knowledge in the older days than it is now. In fact, it's been totally obscured, of course. But I think in the older times, people knew this doctrine. It was not something so surprising. And like I say, I think that the heaven and hell thing comes from Islam. And it destroyed or obliterated the much more subtle and the much deeper understanding of God's ways. So we read in Psalm 101, and starting at verse 6, remember, this is a Psalm of David. Mine eyes shall be upon the faithful of the land, that they may dwell with me. He that walks in a perfect way, he shall serve me. So here we have the faithful of the land will dwell with me, which are the righteous. And he that walks in a perfect way, he shall serve me. The servants of the Lord are saints. He that works deceit shall not dwell within my house. He that tells lies shall not tarry in my sight. That's the unclean or the filthy, because they have deceit. They tell lies, right? They have imaginations. They claim to be something they're not. And they work deceit because they are pretenders, and they are not giving themselves over to be sacrificed with the Lord. No, instead, they're looking for an easy way out. They're more like a Barabbas than they are a Jesus. And finally, in verse 8, it says, I will early destroy all the wicked of the land, and that I may cut off all the wicked doers from the city of the Lord. And this is the idea of the wicked. It even says, destroy the wicked. So the wicked will be burned up and destroyed in the second death in the lake of fire. But the other three survive. And if there's no place found in the city for the righteous, well, the righteous are in the nations. But if there's no place in the nations for the filthy, where are they? They're in outer darkness. Now, for many, you won't understand so quickly the idea that the saved, yes, the believers, yes, are cast into outer darkness. Nobody's taught that. And that's because that has been shielded from people. Not that it doesn't exist. It's all over the Bible again. We'd have to have a separate episode on that. But just reading in Jude, and remember, Peter repeats these words. In Jude, or maybe it's Jude that repeats Peter's words, but he says, of the filthy, these are spots in your feasts of charity when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Remember, without fear, without the fear of the Lord. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds of doctrine. Trees whose fruit withers, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Now, this is a theme that's through the whole Bible. But again, that's on one specific destiny called the filthy or the unclean. Finally, in the last book, in the English versions, of course, in our translation versions, the last book of the Old Testament is Malachi. And we read in 3:18, okay, chapter 3, verse 18, we read again of those four destinies. Then shall you return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serves God and him that serves him not. Now here is the righteous and the wicked. Again, the righteous are the ones who, at the great white throne judgment, the righteous are the ones who populate the nations. The wicked are thrown into the lake of fire. So this has to do with the book of life. But between him that serves God, now that's a saint. The servant of God is the saint. And those that serve him not. In other words, they're standing in the way so often. They're standing in the way of what God is doing. And yet they claim to be saints, or they claim to be disciples, or they claim to be believers, but they're in the way because they're filthy and they're still operating by the flesh, and they're still able to be used even by the enemy, as we see with Judas. There it says Judas, it says, and Satan entered into him. At one point it says, Satan entered into Judas. How can he do that? Well, he wasn't sacrificed. He's not a sacrifice of the Lord. Therefore, the devil can use whoever he wants. And what happens is, if we are uncrucified, if we're unbroken in the outer man, the devil can come in at will and take that person at will, because the human nature, there's no defense against, in the outer man, there's no defense against the devil. The defenses that we have built up are against fellow humans, right? We war with each other, but we're not talking about physical war here. We're talking about spiritual war. So when somebody tries to stand up to the devil in the flesh, he's overcome. That's why we have to surrender to God, surrender ourselves to God, to be broken in the outer man and be crucified in order to be joined, in order to be a vessel of honor rather than a vessel of dishonor. Now, I have skipped over other instances of the four destinies, such as the four chariots, the four spirits, the four compass directions, the four corners of the world, and how those are used in the Bible to denote different things, and it denotes those four destinies so often. But there's too much of a study. I want to move into the New Testament now. Now we turn to the New Testament in the book of Matthew, and we know these are the words of Jesus. So we have Matthew testifying or writing what Jesus said, recorded what Jesus said. And it's the parable of the sower, where we see four kinds of soil. Why are there four kinds of soil? There's only one kind of seed. Why are there four soils? Well, because that represents the four eternal destinies. And we're going to read that. We start on Matthew 13, verse 18. Hear therefore the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and understands it not, then comes the wicked one and catches away that which is sown in his heart. That it is that as he which receives seed by the wayside. So in other words, the devil comes because the wicked person, the devil can go in and out. A wicked person is an open door to the devil. And so he can go in and snatch away any truth. And it's not sown into his heart, and it completely bears no fruit whatsoever. In fact, it's not even considered. And this is talking about the wicked who perish, who are cast into the lake of fire, and they don't continue into eternity. In other words, on these people is the second death. Now, the next verse says, but he that receives the seed into stony places, the same is he that hears the word, and with joy receives it. Now, this is the unclean and the filthy. They hear the gospel and think it's something that's beneficial to them. They're looking to exploit the free gift of Jesus. But yet he has no root in himself, but lasts for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, by and by he is offended. So the offense to such a person is, how dare you? How dare I suffer for something that Jesus already paid for me? They're looking to exploit Jesus. Are they believers? Yes. Do they last for a while? They last. What they're doing is, their hope is in eternity, that they will inherit eternal life. But of course, you know how many, where Jesus says to many, they'll say to him, Lord, Lord. He says, go away. I don't know you, you worker of iniquity, you worker of lawlessness. Because people have taken on a scheme, and there's so many in the modern church, and my ministry, I'm trying to help people. I'm trying to save these people from such an end. But the ones that are filthy, the unclean, need to be cleansed at the cross. The cross of Christ cleanses us from sin, not forgiving. Cleanses us. Remember, God has always been merciful. If God wasn't merciful, none of us would be alive today. So no, God gives his sunshine to the wicked and the just and the unjust. But the cross is about cleansing from sin, and we all need to go to the cross. If we claim the name of Christ, then we need to depart from iniquity. So far we've covered the wicked and the filthy. Let's move on to the righteous. He that receives seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke out the word, and he becomes unfruitful. Now, unfruitful in holiness, not unfruitful in righteousness, because the cares of this world are something that are beneficial in a temporal way. I'll give you an example. A man who loves his family, who works hard, who is so invested in supporting his family and helping others that he's unfruitful, but from a holiness perspective only. These parables are from a holiness perspective. And if we don't understand that, and we don't see that, remember it says the righteous are all filthy, as filthy rag. The righteousness is as filthy rags, right? There's none righteous, no, not one. That's from a holiness perspective only. From a righteous perspective, in other words, from a what you do with what you have, the righteous love their family. Even the Samaritan, the good Samaritan, it doesn't say that he was a holy man. It says that he cared for his neighbor. He looked after that person, a care of the world. So this is where it gets to be complicated a little bit. But you have to understand the difference between holiness and righteousness to understand the Bible, to understand the gospel, to understand anything in life that's beyond the pale of this temporal existence. You need to understand that God is holy. And he will judge hard, based on holiness. But again, he goes easy on the righteous. It depends on what we claim. Because remember when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, and they say, because you say you see, in other words, you understand God's ways, you say you do, because that your sin remains. And Jesus was harder on those people, the religious ones who were trying so hard to do what was right, but they claimed something that wasn't right. Therefore, God saw them as worse than tax collectors and prostitutes. Their physical sins and soulish sins were not as bad as what the Pharisees were doing. So we see here that even the righteous, that the riches of God are choked out because of the cares of the world. They love their wives, their husbands. They love their children. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's not the point. The point is, remember it says, if you love your father, mother, brother, wife, husband, more than me, you cannot be my disciple. It doesn't say you cannot be saved. It says you cannot be my disciple. You can't be the bride of Christ. You can't be a saint in the holy city forever. No, you will have to inhabit the nations. And finally, we have, but he that receives seed into the good ground is he that hears the word and understands it, which also bears fruit and brings forth some 100, some 60, and some 30. This is the saint, this is the servant of God, who sells all to buy the field, so that the treasure becomes his, and it's something that he invests in and makes a return for his master, a return on the investment. Like we read with the talents, the parable of the talents, where the servant produces more talents for his master. In other words, a return on investment, and in holy fruit. Remember, this is a holy and eternal fruit, that the Lord is not interested in temporal things. He's interested in eternal things. And we, if we are empowered to walk in the Spirit, can produce eternal fruit. And that is the domain of the saint. Even the righteous can't do it. The righteous are more concerned about this world, loving their neighbor as themselves, taking care of loving people. And there's nothing wrong with loving people. It just so happens that to be holy, you have to forsake even that love for the Lord, for the love of the Lord. And this is something that has to be understood if we're going to understand the different paths or the different ways of the Lord, and also if we're going to understand the narrow way that Jesus says few will find that that way. Few will find the door and few will find the path. And so we have to understand that it's beyond the grasp of a righteous person unless God opens that person's eyes. Remember it says here, lest he hears the word and understands. That understanding is a gift from God. Now, in the same chapter 13, verse 33, we read about 3 measures of meal, about the kingdom of God being hidden in 3 measures of meal. What does that mean? Well, that means that there are 3 kinds of believers. There are 3 kinds of people that survive. Again, 3 kinds of saved people. Remember that the 4th one is dealt with in the second death. But let's read the parable in verse 33. Another parable spake he unto them. The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. Now, it's a very short parable. But those 3 measures are to the saint, to the righteous, and to the filthy. And each one is leavened in the sense that they grow to their potential. In other words, let the wicked do wickedly, let the righteous be righteous, and let the saint be the saint, let the holy be holy, just like it says in Revelation 22:11, until the whole was leavened. So all we know here is that Jesus is talking about the survivors, or those that would come after him. And these are the different categories or river systems or destinies, whatever way you want to see it, or spirits or winds or paths. Remember now, we are uncovering the ancient paths. With this doctrine, what we're doing is we're exposing the ancient paths. And if we understand the path that we're on, we can pray to God, and we can seek, we can repent, we can seek, and we can change our path. That's the whole idea, is to attain a better resurrection. So we see that unless we understand these paths and understand what they entail, then we will be stuck with this understanding of going to heaven and going to hell. And the idea is that anybody who's not going to hell is going to heaven. And inside that heaven, which of course is a Muslim or an Islamic term, there are 3 different destinies that are being ignored. And if you knew that you were on the path of the filthy, wouldn't you want to know? If you were on the path of the righteous and you realized that you were not part of the bride of Christ, wouldn't you want to know? So the idea is to be informed. And that's the purpose of this episode, is to inform my fellow believers of what's really out there and what's waiting for us on Judgment Day. And now we come to the cross of Christ. Why was Jesus crucified with 2 other people? Why are there 3 crosses? Why is there not just 1 cross? And this, again, has to do with the 4 destinies. All of these things, these 4 destinies are everywhere in the Bible. And the more that you look into it, the more you'll see it. But I'm going to explain to you the cross without going to verses, because everybody knows what the shape of a cross is. And everybody knows the story, I'm hoping. So on the one side, on the one side was a man, a criminal, who was being crucified, but who repented. And Jesus allowed him to come into his kingdom. He says, "You will be with me today in paradise." And that man was a righteous man, because he forsook the evil, and he turned from his wickedness, and he repented of his wickedness, and the Lord forgave him, and he became a righteous man. Okay? And this is before he died. Remember, the cross is not about forgiveness. The cross is about sanctification. The cross is about purification, not forgiveness. Jesus was forgiving people for thousands of years before the cross. And so this is Jesus forgiving him and allowing him to come in as a righteous person in the nations. On his other side is the wicked, the one who's a criminal, but he's not just a criminal, he's an unrepentant criminal. He's got no capacity in him to repent. Like he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't see or perceive or discern what's going on. He doesn't know who Jesus is, and he doesn't care. He says, if you are really a Messiah, then get us off the cross. In other words, he mocks Jesus. That represents the wicked. So we have the righteous and the wicked. Like the book, the Great White Throne Judgment is right there. Those that are written in the book of life and those that aren't, and the ones that are rejected. Now, what about the other 2? What about the saints and the filthy? Well, the filthy, remember, a cross is divided into 4 quadrants. If you look at a cross, you'll get four quadrants. On this right side, there's the righteous man that repents, a criminal on the cross. And remember, these are at his head height. He's talking to them. So they're above the bar of his hands. I'm trying to make you visualize what's going on here. And to the left, he has the wicked. So he's got the righteous and the wicked here. Below him, to the left, he has the filthy that put him on the cross, that mock him as well. They mock him as the wicked does, but they have an idea that they're justified in doing it from God. In other words, they think they're doing God a favor. So the filthy are there in the bottom quadrant, let's say to the left, okay? I'm going to show you why I'm saying this. So the filthy are there too. So so far we have the righteous, we have the wicked, we have the filthy, and what do we have here? We have the saints. Now get this. When Jesus was on the cross, none of his bones were broken. That means his outer man was untouched. But a Roman soldier took a spear and drove it into his side so that the blood poured out. That blood is the sanctifying blood of Christ for the saints. And guess who was there? John was there. The apostle John was there, and his mother was there. So we see that the saints are on the side where the blood runs down and sanctifies them. When Jesus was on the cross, the soldiers took his garments and they divided it in four. There were 4 soldiers, as it says. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also his coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. They said, therefore, among themselves, let us not rend it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, as the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture they did cast lots. These things, therefore, the soldiers did. We see that there are 4 parts. Again, the 4 parts of the clothing went to the 4 soldiers. Again, all these things are showing something. They're teaching us. But the coat was woven by it. There was no way to divide it unless you would destroy it. So only one of the 4 soldiers was able to get the coat. Now the coat is a covering, and the coat represents, out of the 4 destinies, only one has that coat. It's based on holiness. It's based on the garment that is worn by the bride. Only one of the 4 destinies has that garment, or what could be called the righteousness of saints. So where else do we see the casting lots? Go back to Leviticus 16. Remember, the Leviticus 16 is about dividing the people of God into 2 categories, which are those that are sacrificed and those that are not sacrificed. In other words, those that still are unclean. It just so happens that only one of the 4 soldiers by lot draws the garment, draws the coat. But it's to show us that only one of the 4 destinies has that covering, and that's the bride of Christ. Now, I'm not saying that the soldier is the bride of Christ. I'm saying it's representative. But we go back to Leviticus 16 and see that the lot fell on the goat to be sacrificed to the Lord, and another lot fell on the goat that was sent into the wilderness. Now, this is a little bit more difficult to understand about how that works in the spiritual realm of casting lots, and that's for another podcast again. But the idea here, I hope that is understood, is that we see that the cross, the reason why that there's 3 crosses, the reason why that these things happen the way they did, is to show us the 4 destinies and the fact that there's 4 soldiers and 4 parts of his clothing, but also the fact that only one of the soldiers gets the coat. And the same thing, and it's by lot, the same thing that we read in Leviticus 16 about the goats in Yom Kippur. Now, these 4 destinies will be meted out or sorted out. There are 2 judgments to come that will do that sorting. The first judgment is the Bema Seat judgment. Judgment begins at the house of the Lord. That's the Bema Seat. In other words, the saints are judged first. And for 1,000 years, the saints rule with Christ over the nations in the millennium. After that 1,000 years, all the rest of the dead, who are just those that are not part of the household of God. Remember, the household of God is judged first but those that are not part of the household of God are judged afterwards at the great white throne judgment. At that judgment, people that are not written in the book of life, the righteous, are cast into the lake of fire. That's the second death, and they are destroyed there. So often, this idea of heaven and hell is false. The idea of heaven and hell, first of all, heaven and hell are not eternal destinations. The Bible talks about heaven and earth, not heaven and hell. So we see that like these traditions completely blind people to what the Bible is really saying. And I'm hoping in this episode that it'll give people a chance, if you take this seriously and study this, pray about it. Take each one of my examples if you can and look into it more deeply. Again, I've skimmed it. There's so much to this. There's so much to this. And it's so liberating to know the truth. The truth will set you free. You will understand what it is that God is looking for, and you will be able to resist lies if you understand the destinies. So that's why it's so important to understand that we're trying to go after a better resurrection. So first of all, the house of God is judged, and then those are divided between the sacrificial goats and the ones that are cast into utter darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, as we read in Jude as well. And then at the very end, before the coming of the new heaven and new earth, we see the general judgment of the world at the great white throne. And from there, it's not a personal judgment like it is before the Lord. It's not a bema seat where the Lord is there, where you're giving an account to the judge and giving an account to Christ. It's not like that. It's whoever is not written in the book of life is cast into the lake of fire. There's no personal judgment. Either you're in or you're out. So there are two different destinies there, life and death. Right? It's just life and death. It's the nations or it's the lake of fire. Now, I'm hoping that my exposition here of the four destinies throughout the Bible, now again, it's a cursory glance. There's a lot more to it. And the depth of it, like I say, after 20 years or more than 20 years of studying it, I'm still looking into it and I'm still finding new things. And I could give you a lot more based on more detail, but that requires a very solid understanding in the four destinies before you can get into the details and the subtleties. These things they're like a rabbit hole. They go deeper, or layers of an onion. They go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But tonight or today on this episode, I just want to lay out those four river systems. I want to lay out those four destinies. I want to lay out those four winds or four directions. So I want to just read again, finally, the words of Jesus in Revelation 22:11, so that maybe the Lord would speak to your heart and you would understand that the doctrines that are given in the modern church are superficial. They don't help you. They have healed my people slightly, but they have not brought you to the knowledge of the truth. They have not opened up for you the ways that are hidden, full of brambles, the ancient paths that have been overgrown with thistles and thorns. And it's time to clear. It's time to clear those ways and to learn again the proper ways of the Lord, the words of Jesus, and the depth of the words, and let it hit us in the depth of our souls so that we're able to understand with our mind and that we would be healed. We would turn to the Lord and be healed. Remember, it says, lest they hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn to me, that I would heal them. And that's the purpose of understanding the ways of God, understanding his paths. I want to read it again in Revelation 22:11. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He which is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. If you're new to this channel, I ask you to please subscribe, like, leave your comments below, and share with others. Until next time, Chen Ve'Chavod, grace and glory.
We win from